Hey, health junkies! It's time for the Health Fix. Join your host, Dr. Janine Krause, as she gives you a dose of what you need to know and do right now to take control of your health from the inside out, to rebel against aging, look damn good, fight stress, and laugh every day.
Hello, health junkies. Welcome to another episode of the Health Fix. I'm your host, Dr. Janine Krause, and today we're going to be talking about vitamin D and sunshine. So I've noticed in my practice that a lot of people are vitamin D deficient. And of course, this being my fourth episode in the series of 5 where I am discussing the common things that I see in my practice, I had to throw in vitamin D because I worked in Colorado for a very long time. That's like 300 plus days of sunshine, and in particular at high altitude because I was living in Breckenridge. And guess what? I had quite a few people deficient in vitamin D, even at high altitudes, where sun is quite prevalent and closer to you. So there's not a lot of people think, oh, well, if I live somewhere where it's sunny, I'm going to get enough exposure. Well, guess what? If you are not out and about and in nature all the time, you might not be getting enough vitamin D. Top that off with possibly having a genetic mutation that doesn't allow you to absorb vitamin D from the sunshine. So there are 2 factors here, which I want to talk about a little bit here in this episode. So first and foremost, what am I seeing in practice? About 75% of my patients in Washington state have a vitamin D deficiency. And seriously, like I was talking about in Colorado, about 50% in Colorado. Now, when I look into these vitamin D deficiencies, there's a huge connection with migraines and vitamin D deficiency, along with females who have PMS and migraines. So like pre-period migraines, so ones that start like a couple of days before the period starts, or the ones that start as soon as flow starts, or the ones that are at the end of the period. So I've used vitamin D to help with that in particular. I've also noticed that vitamin D deficiencies and magnesium deficiencies go hand in hand. So those of you that haven't listened to the second in the series of these podcasts, it's my episode 27. I talk all about a magnesium deficiency conundrum that I'm noticing tons of patients also with the vitamin D and magnesium deficiency too. I'm also noticing a connection between vitamin D deficiency and chronic mono. So say you had mono when you were a teen, in your early 20s, something of that nature. Well, guess what? Sometimes that virus doesn't completely go away and it can reactivate itself. Now, it's not common thought in modern medicine that happens, but hey, I will run labs and notice that, oh, this person had mono, they tell me, 15, 20 years ago, and here we are still with high titers, meaning that your body is still actively fighting that virus. And I've noticed a long-term vitamin D deficiency goes along with chronic mono. Herpes, that also can be a huge problem. Recurrent herpes and low vitamin D deficiency. So vitamin D deficiency and herpes, big issue there. So if you keep getting cold sores or you're having some problems down below, hey, you might want to get your vitamin D checked because that could be part of the issue, because vitamin D is so critical for the immune system. Another biggie is thyroid issues. Anyone with hypothyroidism, anyone that suspects they have hypothyroidism, you want to get your vitamin D checked and get of course, your thyroid labs as well, because it's hand in hand. Almost every person that has a thyroid issue also has a vitamin D deficiency if they have not supplemented at all. Another biggie is gut issues. So Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, even just IBS, so just the plain old irritable bowel syndrome. A lot of these folks can have vitamin D deficiency because you need to be able to absorb fat. So that being said, folks that have had their gallbladders removed, things of that nature, guess what? You're probably going to have a more difficult time absorbing vitamin D. And so that's huge. You want to make sure that you know where your vitamin D status is. So before I get into telling you how to get that, let's talk a little bit more about what vitamin D does for us, because I mentioned a little bit about chronic infections. So vitamin D is like a booster for your white blood cells. It basically helps them to work better. There are receptors on pretty much all of our cells for vitamin D, as well as I mentioned before, magnesium. These are huge. Vitamin D, huge vitamin, magnesium, huge mineral. So we've also found that if you improve your vitamin D status, you can reduce your colon, prostate, or breast cancer rate by 30 to 50%. Now, that alone kind of gives us this connection between chronic infections and cancer. And I will not go into that in great detail in this podcast. I will in a future podcast for sure. But in this case, there is a huge connection between your body not being able to clear chronic infections and you getting cancer. We're starting to really look at the connection between viruses in particular and cancer. And you've probably seen that in the research if you followed it at all. Now, another big thing that I find interesting is a Canadian study found females that had their most sun exposure as a teen and a young adult had 70% decreased risk of developing breast cancer. That's huge. That's why we need to get our kiddos and teenagers out of the basements and their rooms from playing the video games and go play outside again. I'm psyched about this because my mom and aunt both died of breast cancer. Holy cow. I used to love to be outside. We had a swimming pool. I would tan myself to basically looking black. And you know what? I sure hope that helps me because, boy, it didn't help my wrinkle status. But nevertheless, I'm hoping at least all of that sunshine for me has helped in that case. So all that being said, what the heck's going on? Why are we now talking about vitamin D deficiency when 20 years ago we didn't talk about it, or even 30 years ago? Well, I think we're starting to figure out that, one, we can test it, but I think also we're starting to notice connections between vitamin D deficiency and certain illness. Now, a lot of folks are aware of MS being connected, so multiple sclerosis being connected to low vitamin D deficiency, or boy, I can't talk today. Low vitamin D. And so that's huge in and of itself. Of course, in the northern latitude of the United States, we have more vitamin D deficiency types of illnesses because there's less sun. That's why Washington does have a high rate of multiple sclerosis, so MS. And that's also why Minnesota, areas of that nature, also have a high prevalence of MS. And so the less exposure to the sun, the more likelihood you're going to have risk for certain conditions. Now, we also have to think about modern day. A lot of us are stuck on the computers working. We're not outdoors working like we used to be. But I'm hoping that through this podcast, I can change that to at least get folks out walking or something of that nature, just to get outside and get some sunlight. Because going from work, driving from work, and popping into your office and popping out of the office to go get a Starbucks and then going back to work, that's not enough time. You're too fast in and out of places. You want to get that sun exposure. So that leads me right into my next section of the podcast. How do we get to this state of vitamin D deficiency? Obviously, we're not spending that much time in nature outside. That's one thing. The other big thing is we're terrified of getting wrinkles and we are wearing too much sunscreen. So now that might sound really bizarre because yes, I do talk about wearing sunscreen and I think it's important, but I also think it's important to go without it as well for about 15 minutes each day. Now, most ladies have their sunscreen on their face just to prevent wrinkles, and they do this every single day, and they do it before they walk out the door. So there you have it. You've got your SPF on, and so you're not going to be able to take your makeup off before you go to work. I mean, gosh, who would do that? So I don't blame you. But what I would do is think about spending some time after you get out of work, if the sun's still up, and using that time. Now, we have this window of what's been researched, and ultimately it's 15 minutes 3 times a day with your face and upper arms exposed to the sun. So obviously in the middle of January, not many people are going to do that. And obviously in Seattle, in the middle of January, February, or even if we go into November, it's not going to happen because there might not be any sun. We might not see sun for the whole month. And so obviously in some cases we have to work on supplementing. But if the sun is out, I really, really do encourage making some time to go out and get your sun exposure. Now, you might also be thinking at this point, well, I don't know if I even absorb vitamin D, so why would I risk it to get wrinkles? Well, that's a very good argument. And there are things like 23andMe out there. There are other genetic testing out there that you could go and see if you have a genetic mutation called VDR, TAQ, or BSM. So that is the mutation that one would have if you are not you're not able to absorb vitamin D from the sun. So something to check out if you're thinking that that might be an issue for you. Now, one of the other things you could do is you could go out in the sun and you could do the 3 days a week, 15 minutes. You could do that for, let's say, a month, and then retest your levels. So test before, test after, and see if it goes up. That's another way to go about it. And, you could see what happens, or you could have a low level supplementation of vitamin D all the time. I typically will have folks do about 2,000 IU a day. That's like the regular throughout the summer. And then going into the winter, we bump it up to 5,000. And if we see that they have a deficiency, of course, on labs, we're going to do 10,000 IU a day for about 8 weeks and retest. Now, I never really just jump on the, hey, take a whole bunch of vitamin D. There are some folks out there that think that it doesn't matter, just take it. I honestly am not that type of person. I really do want to know my patient's status before I start to mess with giving them more vitamin D than they may be taking, or vitamin D for the first time. So something to keep in mind. Now, just a little crazy history on sunscreen and vitamin D here. So back in the Egyptian times, did you know that they were using olive oil and rice with jasmine or the plant lupine and zinc oxide for sunscreen? I think that's crazy and kind of cool. And so anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Also want to mention that aspen bark has an SPF of 5. So you could slather that white little haze that's on the aspen bark on your face just in case of emergency. I don't know. Fun stuff. I'm full of geeky details today. Another crazy one is that the first synthetic paste of sunscreen was made in 1928, and that was a zinc oxide synthetic prep. And in 1936, L'Oreal made a lotion-style sunscreen. And I think at this point, that's where we started to head downhill. 1936. No, I'm kidding. Honestly, we were outside a lot more, still into probably the 60s, before we started to all kind of get into more of indoor office style types of jobs and kind of the explosion and start of all of the tech companies like IBM and all those guys back in those days. But nevertheless, just a little geeky history in terms of sunscreen. So one of the big things too that I often think about in terms of why some folks might have vitamin D deficiencies is looking back at the digestive system. So our probiotics, so the beneficial bacteria in our gut, those guys help us to absorb vitamin D. So if you're not taking probiotics, or you've had a lot of antibiotics, your digestive system's trash because you just don't eat well, you might need probiotics to help you to absorb some vitamin D. The other big thing is a lot of people are still on the low-fat diets. They're afraid of any good fat, like even avocado or some of the cashew nut butters, those things. And to be honest with you, you need some vitamin D. Yes, you do need vitamin D. You need fat to help you to absorb vitamin D. And so vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. So if you are eating a low fat and say you're not cooking with oils at all, you are not going to be able to absorb vitamin D sufficiently. So that's another big deal. So keep that in mind if you are one of those folks out there that's afraid of fat, not using oils to cook, things of that nature. Maybe you've been terrified because your doctor told you your cholesterol is too high, and so you are just avoiding every form of fat you possibly can. Well, you need a little bit, and definitely a plant-based type of fat to help you to absorb your vitamin D. A lot of times I'm always talking about good oils like expeller pressed olive oil, and avocado oil, virgin coconut oil, something of that nature to help you to get that vitamin D in. That being said, a lot of folks will just take vitamin D supplements whenever they want. You want to take your vitamin D supplement when you're eating a meal that has some fat. So keep that in mind. So another biggie that we don't tend to think about for vitamin D is that vitamin D dosages aren't necessarily one size fits all. So the larger an individual you are, so the more body fat you have or the more muscle mass you have, the more vitamin D you need. In particular, a lot of people don't think about this, but that's huge. It is somewhat weight dependent in terms of your vitamin D needs. So I have a lot of people in my practice that have some more muscle mass on them, and I have noticed that I can supplement them with 10,000 IU for my generic dosage to help to increase their vitamin D levels, and that's 10,000 IU a day for 8 weeks. That's kind of my standard. But if someone has a larger muscle mass, sometimes I'm going up to 15,000. Sometimes I've done 50,000, not a day, but I've done 50,000 a week for 4 weeks to see what happens there. That's a whole nother protocol, which is common in the conventional medicine world too. But sometimes we need that higher dosage in one sitting, so once a week, to help people to get it in versus daily. So there's a lot of different ways to think about how to get in the vitamin D. And honestly, if you are heavier and you have more muscle mass, you want to play with your dosage a little bit to see what gets you the best absorption and the best levels. And I'll talk about those ideal levels, of course, here in a little bit. But also keep in mind that you want to test, because you do not want to overshoot vitamin D. Levels of vitamin D over 100 nanograms per milliliter can cause issues. So something to think about, and just don't take this, as you can take as much vitamin D as you want and it won't harm you, because vitamin D is fat soluble. It is stored in your fat and your body does hold on to it. Same thing as vitamins A, vitamins K, and E. A, D, E, and K, those guys are all your fat soluble, so they store in your fat. Big issue there. So you don't want to overdo any of those guys. So another big thing to think about is the darker skin that you have, the more sun exposure you need than a lighter skin person. So what that also means is the more vitamin D you need to get through to absorb. So if you have more olive colored skin, brown skin, black skin, you're wanting to get even more vitamin D as well. You're going to need more vitamin D. In fact, when I was working in Colorado, I had a lot of Latino patients, and I noticed that their vitamin D deficiencies were much more severe than a lot of us lighter skinned folks. So that's something to keep in mind. Weight, muscle mass, and the color of your skin all make a difference on the amount of vitamin D that you need. Okay, so I've talked all about vitamin D in terms of absorption and things of that nature, but how the heck do you test for it? Well, your conventional labs can test you for vitamin D. It's 2-OH, so 2-hydroxy vitamin D, but it looks like literally when you're looking at the lab, it's 2,5-OH vitamin D. So your primary care doc can do this for you. All you have to do is ask, and they shouldn't argue with you. Vitamin D is huge. A lot of folks have heard about the research in connection with immune deficiency, PMS, migraines, aches and pains, bone strength, even things of that nature. Now, there are more advanced profiles to look at the fractionation, so the breakdown of your vitamin D, but those are more expensive. You could go with the 2,5-hydroxy, 2,5-OH vitamin D to start with and see where things are at. Now, I did mention genetic testing to evaluate if you're an absorber of vitamin D or not. I do think that's important. I think genetic testing is important. I've mentioned in previous episodes, because it gives you a sense of what you're working with in terms of your genes compared to what's actually happening in your body. So I highly recommend getting genetic tested to know what's up with your vitamin D levels. So check out 23andMe or some of the other ones out there. There's plenty of other companies out there nowadays. Now, when is the best time to test for vitamin D? Honestly, February, especially in North America, because February is when we have our lowest levels of light, and so this will be your lowest level time. The highest levels of vitamin D have been found in August. Makes sense. It's at the end of the summer when most people have at least been outside a couple minutes, so something to think about in particular. Now, if you are someone who burns very easily, you have very, very light skin, I know that it's scary to consider sun exposure, and I get it. And it might be that you just need to supplement and keep wearing your sunscreen, because yes, the risk of 15 minutes and burning, that's not for everybody. Let's put it that way. So always get tested first before you start to supplement or go on a sun exposure binge, it's good to know where you're at. Now, if you're listening to this and it's right around February, great, go get your levels tested. Typically what I do with my patients is we'll test in February, we'll repeat in March, and if reduced, we'll retest again in August or September after we've went through a summer and we've went through some supplementation rounds. But typically I will try to boost someone's vitamin D for a month, then retest. So for example, I mentioned earlier, I find that someone's vitamin D levels are low. I go, okay, let's give them 10,000 IU a day for 4 weeks. Let's just say that's my generic prescription because like I said before, I do vary it based on someone's skin color, body weight, and their muscle mass. But let's go with my generic 10,000 a day, 4 weeks, then I retest. You always want to retest because you want to see if it worked. You want to see what happened. And it's critical to retest. You have to know if what you're doing is working. Now, another thing that I've done, if someone has pretty severe migraines or pretty severe PMS, I will use 50,000 IU of vitamin D mid-cycle. So say someone has a vitamin D deficiency, and we put them on the 10,000 IU a day for 4 weeks. Now, throughout that 4-week cycle where their ovulation comes, I have them take 50,000 that day only. And the reason being is because we've had some research that shows if you boost the vitamin D mid-cycle, you can get some pretty good results with getting rid of my PMS and migraines. And it's not usually miracle with that first round. It usually takes about 3 cycles, but something to consider if you're having pretty bad PMS. All right. So my other big thing that I do in my office is vitamin D3 injections. And by the way, when you're supplementing with vitamin D, you want vitamin D3. D3, that's the best type. That's what you want. So in my office, I often will do an injection of vitamin D once a month for some of my folks that have digestive issues. And I vary it between 50,000 and 100,000 IU per injection. Now that sounds pretty crazy, but what the big deal there is that it's going to be time release. It's going to get absorbed through the fat. I inject into the muscle, it's going to get absorbed, get stored in the fat, and get utilized throughout the body. Now, when you do an injection of that high of an amount, you want to make sure someone's got magnesium, vitamin K also on board because you don't want to cause any negative reactions with that high of a dose of vitamin D. Now, that being said, I have a lot of people who say they feel sick when they even take just small amounts of vitamin D, and that's probably because they have a magnesium and vitamin K2 issue, and issue I mean deficiency. And so I always recommend supplementing in some magnesium and vitamin K2 whenever you're getting vitamin D3. So one of my favorite supplements on that level is something called vitamin D Synergy. This is from Designs for Health. Great company. I do not get money from them, disclosure, but if you do go to their website, designsforhealth.com, and you do enter my name, you could order directly through them, but you can find it on Amazon as well. So gut issues, if you've got Crohn's, if you've got ulcerative colitis, you have irritable bowel syndrome, you have chronic diarrhea, any of those digestive stuff, issues going on, vitamin D3 injections are very helpful. Also for my PMS folks, I have done 50,000 IU injections mid-cycle, and that's worked out really well for a lot of folks. So something to keep in mind there. Now, let's go into those vitamin D levels. So ideal vitamin D levels are between 50 and 75. Most of the time when I look at labs, I'm seeing folks in the teens to low 30s. Conventional medicine looks at 30 as being kind of the low level of normal up to about 50. And so I like between 50 and 75 nanograms, so that's ng/dl, nanograms per deciliter. Some say up to 100 is fine. I'm a little nervous about 100 because I have seen people feel a little sick, a little toxic. And one of the biggies of a overdose or too much vitamin D is feeling toxic and nauseous. And I typically try to avoid that. However, there's a lot of great research out there for treating cardiovascular disease and keeping vitamin D levels between 70 and 100 nanograms per deciliter. So if you do have arterial issues, so you've got blockages, you have, and hopefully you're getting those taken care of if they are bad enough, you have some stents placed or something of that nature. But if you have higher cholesterol, you have hypertension, so high blood pressure, things of that nature, 70 to 100 nanograms per deciliter is the researched amount to help. I personally like folks to hover just around 75 in that case and not go up too much higher than that, because we don't want you feeling nauseous all the time and not just feeling off. So what other brands, how do you go about this in terms of finding the right vitamin D supplement for you? Honestly, I had mentioned Designs for Health before, the vitamin D synergy. That is 5,000 IU of vitamin D and a vitamin K2 dosage. You would have to get your vitamin or your magnesium on its own to have that perfect triangle of vitamin D, potassium, and potassium. What am I saying? Yikes, losing my mind today. Vitamin D and vitamin K and magnesium. Those three are your perfect triangle of maximizing your absorption of the vitamin D and utilization of vitamin D effectively in the body so you don't feel toxic. But nevertheless, vitamin D synergy is Designs for Health. It's what I take on a daily basis here in Washington. When I do get into the summer though, I drop down to pure encapsulations vitamin D, and I'll take 2,000 IU a day because I am an absorber of vitamin D. I'm just fine with it. In fact, it's probably the only time I really feel truly like warm to the bone. I absolutely love the sun. If you meet me, you will see that I am usually pretty tan throughout the summer and tan whenever I can be because I do love it so much. And yes, within reason, I do have to think about wrinkles and sun damage and things of that nature, but honestly it's the only time I feel truly like warm inside, so I need that vitamin D. And that means for me, what I found with my genetic testing when I did the pathway fit and things of that nature, the pathway genetics testing, it did say that I need to make sure that I optimize my vitamin D levels. And so it means that my genetics, I absorb the vitamin D, but I'm one that's going to need a little bit more. So nevertheless, I definitely in the summer will take advantage of being able to be outside, and I love being outside. So I highly recommend that if you feel trapped to your desk and you're not getting outside, it's just so great for your mind and your health to get outside and walk and be out in nature. So if I can inspire you to do that a little bit more to get your vitamin D levels up naturally versus having to take so many supplements, seriously do it. So there's that. Now, in terms of where to go from here, I highly, highly recommend you check out my resources on my website, drjkrausend.com, that are attached to this podcast, because the 25OH testing is critical. You don't want to just jump into supplementing a ton of vitamin D. I do think if you're not interested in getting testing, at least 2,000 IU of vitamin D a day is a great place to start if it's summertime your time, and moving up to 5,000 IU a day during the winter, I think that that's safe. However, like I said, always looking at testing is a good idea because you don't want to overshoot it, especially if you're one of those people that you're out in the sun quite a bit and you're absorbing quite a bit of vitamin D and then you take a ton on top of it. Yeah, probably not a good idea. So get tested, 25OH testing, and you can get that through LabCorp, Quest, all those regular old labs. You just got to ask your primary care provider. Now, if you don't have a primary care provider and you're wanting to get testing done, there are a ton of resources as well online with different companies that will test your vitamin D levels, and I've got them in the resources portion of this episode. If you want to know if you have a genetic mutation preventing your vitamin D absorption, genetic testing companies like 23andMe are a great place to start. Now, I also will have links to the 2 supplement companies that I like for vitamin D. Now, that is Pure Encapsulations and Designs for Health. There are some companies coming online here that are creating patches to help you to absorb vitamin D transdermally, so across the skin. That's pretty cool. I have not had the liberty of testing a patient before and after using a patch. I'm hoping to be able to do that here soon because I do think it's a cool concept and I would love to see how it works. So keep in mind that I have not done it myself. I can't endorse it, but I'll put a link at least to that on my website at drjkrausend.com. Alrighty, you have survived another episode of The Health Fix. I'm your host, Dr. Janine Kraus. Next episode, we are going to go through the final thing that I see as a deficiency that's super common in my patients, and one of the things that I highly recommend supplementing with. It is omega-3 fatty acids. So stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in to The Health Fix, the podcast all about taking control of your health, rebelling against aging, and having fun every day. A lot of patients ask me, do you think I'm aging too fast? So, I created an evaluation checklist for you to see for yourself. Plus, I created a resource guide to help you slow down the aging process right now. You can find it for free on my website, drjkrausend.com. If you like this podcast, help get the word out to others by liking it and rating it. If you'd like more natural health tips and want to join our Facebook community where I interact daily, click on the Join Group button on our website at drjkrausend.com.